One. Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you this week. Here's my question for you. As we do every week, we start out with a question. And the question is your business growing as fast as your ambition to grow is? And I was like, man, why in the world would you ask me that question? And I'm like, that's a really good question. I love talking about business growth. And we're actually now comparing it to our own personal ambition. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Sonya Shelton. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You are the CEO at Executive Leadership Consulting. So fill us in on what is Executive Leadership Consulting.
Well, we work with visionary leaders, just like you were saying, who want to grow their business. They're ambitious about doing it. And we help them create synergy between their business strategy and their organizational culture so that they have a team, those two things working together, so that they have a team that's really collaborating and moving that vision forward.
Oh. And I wrote down strategy and culture because in my mind, those tend to be like almost like opposites of each other. So I'm just curious because can you strategize on culture or does culture just kind of show up? Where do you land kind of on that?
There's that old Peter Drucker quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And I used to believe that.
Yeah.
But then as, the further I got into my consulting life, I realized it's actually not true. And
Okay.
it's not that either eats the
Yeah.
other for breakfast, that they need to work together. So we say culture and strategy need to have breakfast together. And it really
Gotcha.
is about, yes, of course, you can have a culture that you just allow to develop organically, and it's sort of out of your control at that point. You're kind of leaving it up to the people on your team to develop what that culture is. A lot of companies do that. But
Sure.
you can also be really strategic about it and say, okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve as a business? What is our purpose? What is our vision? What is our strategy? And then how do we build a culture to really accelerate that so that the culture is actually feeding the business? So it's not just a great place to work, but it's actually a culture that's moving the business forward and growing it as fast as your ambition.
Oh, so vision and purpose and strategy, like on the surface, I hear a lot. My vision is to make money, my purpose is to make money, and my strategy is to make money, right? Why do I have to get it more complicated than that? So if somebody's on this podcast today listening, and that's kind of their thought process, or maybe just that's what popped in their head first, how do you kind of help people with their vision and their purpose, because those are really ambiguous and I can see where you can get in the weeds really easy on that. So how do you help people with that?
Yeah, very, very simply, we start with why. So
Okay.
why do you do what you do? And I love that you said that you brought up that our purpose is to make money, our vision is to make money, and our strategy is to make money, because that's what puts you in the sea of sameness. And if you are, that makes you just like every single one of every other company that does what you do,
Sure.
then that's all you're going to get. And that impacts who you attract as a customer or client. They're just going to see you, they're competing on money, right? You're competing
Yeah.
on price. And the same thing for your people. When you're looking to hire somebody, you're competing on price. How much can you pay them? Are you going to pay them more than your competitor? Right.
Yeah.
But if you're really looking at your purpose, why you do what you do. So we completely agree with Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Start with Why. We also start with why. And we look at that's what drives you. That's your motivation, right? And we
Okay.
start with
Sure.
at the leaders level, right? So what is your personal why, your personal motivation, what personally drives you, the team level, and then the organization level, so the company level. And then we add to that why your how. So how do you deliver on that why? How do you internally process information? How do you internally provide the product or service that you provide? And what's different about that? What makes that uniquely you?
Sure.
And then what can other people expect? What's the result, right? So we look at that formula, that why, how, and what at an individual level, at a team level, and at the company level. And then we put that together, and that's your purpose. So
Mm,
it's very simple formula to, and we have assessments that help to um, speed up the process to get people there faster.
sure.
But it's really about when you have that purpose, and I think maybe it started around COVID time, where it became really prevalent that people were more focused on purpose. But I saw a lot of research, especially in marketing, that younger generations really are purpose focused. And it's not just about where they want to work, it's also about how they buy. So
Okay.
they will be willing to spend more money to on your company if they agree with your purpose. If your purpose is in alignment with who they what they believe, how they see themselves, what they want to support. And I think as time progresses and they come more and more into the workplace, into the economy, we're going to see more and more companies having purpose as a competitive advantage.
Sure. Oh, that's
And
awesome. Go ahead.
yeah, and then we look at your vision is where do you want to go? So you have your purpose. Where do you want to take that? What do you ultimately want? That's your ambition. Where do you want to be as a company? How far do you want to grow this? What's the impact you want to have? How big do you want to be? And what's that destination for you? And that could be, 10 years, it could be 5 years. You can set that time horizon however you like. And
Sure.
then your strategy is what are the steps you need to take to get there? What do you need to focus on to be able to move you towards your vision?
Well, and I want to circle back to your why because you mentioned like a personal why, a team why, and then a company why. What if those don't align? I mean, what if my why doesn't align with my company? Or what if my why doesn't align with the team that I'm on? I mean, what that can be obviously pretty tragic. There can be a lot of fallout out of that. Do you see that very much in your work?
Not really. And the reason is because most people misunderstand what their why is.
Okay,
Right. So some people will say, oh, well, I already know my why. Like my why is my family or providing for my family, or my why is my faith sometimes, right? Or my why is I really want to make a difference in the world. I want to have a big impact. And we call those your who's and your what's, not necessarily your why.
gotcha.
So for example, my why, my personal why is to empower others to make a bigger impact. And I do that through collaboration, right? So how do we work together and partner together to make a bigger impact? That's my why. And that shows up no matter where I am, whether it shows up in my work, it shows
Okay,
up in my family, it shows up in my volunteer work, right? In my social life, right? Like I'm
sure.
always looking at how can I contribute, how can I
Okay.
help, and how can I collaborate with other people, right? Um, so it's really understanding that about yourself so then you understand the value that you bring to the team.
And is that hard, Sonia, to like find that why from a personal perspective? Because I think of and I hear people are like, I don't have time to do a retreat, or I don't have time to sit with there's like this conflict in people's brains, right? Because we're telling them to find this, but yet I gotta pay bills, I gotta run a team, I gotta run a company, I gotta. I mean, is that like, are they polar opposites, or are there ways that you can kind of run a business while finding your why? I'm just curious what your experience has been with that.
And I think that a number of years ago that was probably true. Thankfully, we work with a company called the Why Institute that used Simon Sinek's model from Start with Why, this why, how, and what model. And actually using an algorithm, we can discover your why, how, and what in
Mm.
about 10 minutes
Wow.
through a discovery tool. And then we take that and we say, okay, we'll sit down with you, take that information and say, okay, now how do you really integrate this and apply it? We call it your
Mm,
why connection. So
sure.
so that it's connected to what you do and connected to who you are. It's not just results of something where you're like, okay, yeah, that sounds like me, but now what? Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really taking that information from the discovery tool and say, okay, now how do you apply this as a leader? How do you apply this in your company? How do you apply this in your family even, or your
Sure.
relationships?
Wow. And so so if I find out my why as a leader, and now I may have a team that don't align with that. I mean, are whys not fixable, changeable? Are they, like we both are involved with disc, and your personality for the most part is what it is, right? I mean, it's kind of set that way unless there's like a traumatic event in your life, you generally have the same spot. Does your why change in your career, I guess, is kind of the question that I wanted to start with.
Doesn't, because it's really in, um from neuroscience perspective, it's in the limbic part of the brain that doesn't have language. So we feel it. It's what motivates us. It's
Okay.
I think it's probably developed, um, maybe somewhere around teenage years, and then you've got it, right?
Okay.
And and then, but it's how do you then apply that? You might apply that in different ways through your career or as a leader. And then we call it your superpower. So every superpower has a kryptonite.
Yeah.
So so I'll just use myself as an example, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my why, from the discovery tool, is defined as contribute, right? So
Okay.
contributing to a greater cause, right?
Right.
And then how I describe that is in my own words. So what's the downside of having a why of contribute? I don't always say no when I should be saying no. I maybe say
Sure.
yes too often, right? And then I'm overcommitting, and then I'm overwhelmed by all the overcommitments, right? Right. So that's something that I have to work in, and my solution for myself has been not to try to learn how to say no, but to ask who else, right? So it's not me. This isn't part of my purpose and vision, my priorities, but who else do I know that could help them, or what other resource could I give them? So I'm not saying no and going against what motivates me. I'm redirecting them to another place. And every why has something like that, where it's either maybe overused or misunderstood. If people don't know that about you, it can definitely be misunderstood. Um, I'll give another example. My cousin, works in IT, and he kept getting fired. It was like, I was like, let's do your Y connection, because there's something off here. He literally in
Sure.
his last job got promoted and then was fired 2 months later. And was like,
Oh,
okay, something's wrong, right? Then
sure. Sure.
so I said, let's do your Y connection. And I found out that his why is to challenge the status quo, like always be
Oh,
innovating, always doing something different,
sure.
right? And
Sure.
then how he delivers on that is finding better ways of doing things. And then his what is systems and processes, the right way of doing doing things that are predictable.
Yeah.
Perfect for IT, but the people that he was working with didn't appreciate his innovation. So he
Yeah.
started his own business, right? And I
Yeah.
said, you need to be an entrepreneur. And now
Sure.
he's doing great, because people are
Yeah.
like, we want those innovative solutions. That's what we want from a consultant, right?
Sure.
So that's where, like you were saying, it can maybe not be the best fit for where you are, but then can open up what are the possibilities for what you could create.
Wow. And I think that's the power of assessments, whatever type of assessment you use. It's so powerful to understand that you have a tendency to do whatever that is. I mean, we were talking before we jumped on, that we both have a very similar personality. And so it's easier for us to communicate. Um, it's weird though, because if we were going to build a team and we had only, I know earlier in my career, I was like, if I could just find 10 more Daves, this team would be awesome, right? And now I realize that if we would have had 10 Daves back then, I would have had post-it notes everywhere because I'd have all these ideas because I love to come up with new ideas. I struggle with being able to implement those ideas. And so there are personalities that implement these ideas. And if that person or that group isn't on your team, you're really that's a potential challenge. So how do you guys create strong teams and successful teams? What's your thought on that process there?
Yeah, it is, again, starting with purpose, right? So looking at what's the purpose for the company? What's the purpose of the team? So even if it's a department within a company, what's your purpose as a team? And how can you align against that purpose, right? So we go through the same model at the team level as we do
Sure.
at the company level, right? So what is your purpose? What is your vision as a team? And then what are the things that you need to do to move that vision forward? And then what do other people need to know about you as a team, right? So how do you communicate that purpose to, if you're a leadership team, to the rest of the organization? How do you communicate the purpose of the leadership team? Purpose of the leadership team might be different than the purpose of the company, right?
Mm,
So how do you then communicate so that people know this is how we operate as a leadership team? And then um, and then really making sure that everybody understands what are our goals and priorities, right? So aligned to make sure that everybody is moving in the right direction.
sure.
Do we have the right processes and management routines in place? Do we understand each other? Um, do we understand everybody's role on the team, right? And
Yeah.
and do we have role clarity and how decisions are made? And then finally, what we call passion, we actually call culture passion, which is around, are people passionate about the company? Are they passionate about their role? And ultimately, do they trust each other, right? And so understanding each other, like we were talking about with DISC,
Yeah.
you need to be you need to understand how people communicate. You need to understand the other people's whys on your team and what motivates them, right? To be able to have that trust and be able to
Yeah.
operate as a high functioning team.
Wow, that's so powerful. When we come back from the break, Sonia, I want to ask you about Disney because you worked there and then you transformed into an entrepreneur. Maybe you were always an entrepreneur and it was just under the surface. So when we come back, I really want to unpack that with you.
Great.
Awesome. Welcome back. We're talking to Sonya Shelton, the CEO of Executive Leadership Consulting. And so prior to your entrepreneurial journey, you were, and I hate the words, but everyone understands it, you were in corporate America. So how did that transition work? First of all, what did you do at Disney? I'm curious to see what kind of fun stuff you were doing there.
Yeah, so I was the head of internal communications globally. So for all of the Walt Disney Company, I worked, not only did I work in corporate, I was worked in the corporate of the corporate. I was
Okay.
in and I was in Disney at a very interesting time when, I think when I first started working there, I really got to see the best of the best in culture.
Okay.
Disney had an internal competitive edge that we called synergy, where all of the areas of the company really work together on the company priorities to make 1 + 1 = 3, is what we used to say, right? And
Sure.
and so that has influenced a big part of how I work with companies now to create that synergy between their strategy and culture. But then I also worked there at a time that nobody in my position had ever experienced this, and nobody in that position will ever experience again, where we had a member of the Disney family, Roy Disney, leading a shareholder revolt against our CEO at the time, Michael Eisner.
Mm,
And so it was basically like imagine being like in internal communications for the whole company
sure.
when you're basically going through a divorce as a company, right? And so I learned so much about my own leadership, but it was not a great place to work at the time.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of, my team had a lot of pressure on us about keeping people focused. There were things all over the media about the infighting that was happening, and
Mm,
um, so I think I realized that as a leader, I was impacted by my environment and I
sure.
didn't behave well, right? And my team got it, I got it, and then I just passed it right down to them. And they gave me the feedback that, hey, that's not okay, right?
Sure.
And so we had a conversation about it, and intentionally kind of created our own microculture of how we were going to be as a team in this crisis of chaos, right? And so through that experience, and then coming out the other side of it with the company, I saw the impact of both leadership and culture, from the best of the best and the
Mm,
worst of the worst.
sure.
And
Wow.
I realized that I could have a bigger impact. So going back to my why, I could have
Yeah.
a bigger impact from outside the company that I could from inside the company. And then I could also impact more companies with the knowledge, experience, and understanding that I had as a result. So that's why I started executive leadership consulting.
Oh, did you have that burning within you for a long time before you actually jumped in?
Yes, I did for sure.
Okay.
So my parents were entrepreneurs,
Okay.
and so they had my whole life they had their own business,
Oh,
and
great.
I didn't really realize it at the time. And if you would have asked me back then, like as a teenager, if I would be where I am now, I would have said,
Yeah.
no way, I'm not doing that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what ended up happening was they actually had the harder conversations, which mostly were about people at home at the dinner table, right? So
Sure.
so I
Yeah.
actually got the education of the hardest parts of running a business from them, just from what they were talking about over dinner, right? And I didn't realize it and I didn't appreciate it at the time. But it did sort of ingrain some leadership principles and that entrepreneurial spirit at a young age.
Yeah.
So the beginning of my career, I worked for a lot of startups, and then I would
Okay.
quickly like rise up in the ranks. And then Disney came after me. I had a communications company at the time, and they reached out to me about a position that I had, and I actually went on the interview thinking that I was going to get them as a client, but then I
Mhm.
saw how much help they really needed and
Sure.
decided to go ahead and go to work for them.
Wow.
So I never thought of myself as a corporate person, but I was there for 7 years,
Yeah.
and most of it was great.
So did you owned your own company, then you went into corporate, then you went back to owning your own company?
Yes, yes.
Oh my gosh. So that's a new one because normally we're seeing that transition, from corporate into running your own business. And so that's crazy to think that way. Was that first month of, were you like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Or were you stoked the whole time?
It's a nightmare at first
Oh,
because
yeah,
because I wasn't able to have that impact and influence as fast as I wanted to at first.
sure,
So when you're an entrepreneur, you make a change and it happens today, right? When you're in a big company, you want to make a change and it could happen next year, right? And that pace was something that I really had to get used to. Um,
yeah,
and we were talking about earlier, with my disc profile, the it showed up that when Sonya hears no, she's going to come back to fight another day. And
yep.
that was my approach when I was at Disney. I was continuing to have that entrepreneurial spirit. People would say no, and I'd say okay, and then I look for another opportunity to bring a different angle to it and ask
Sure.
again, right?
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Ask in a different language, maybe that'll help, right? Yeah. That's so
Exactly.
cool. Well, and I think it's so powerful, and we say as often as we can, there's no right or wrong to being an entrepreneur or being in corporate America. Neither one's better or worse. Entrepreneurs aren't at a higher level. There's plenty of awesome people in both. So our goal is not to say you should own your own business. It's to say that you really, hopefully, are doing what you are wanting to do and what you're good at doing along the way. So for you, do you ever see yourself going, I don't want to say back like it's a bad word, but do you ever see yourself re-entering corporate America for yourself?
I don't think so, because one of the things that my job allows me to do, and I work with big companies also,
Yeah,
um, but I can say things that as somebody from the outside, that I would never be able to say if I was an
sure.
employee, right? So
Yep.
as part of that political structure, with what I do, particularly around the culture side of what I do, I need to be able to call things out to
Yep.
leaders, would probably be a career limiting conversation if I was an
Sure.
employee.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, and I think that's a mark of a true consultant and a coach, depending on your wording. And for people listening, if you're considering a coach or a consultant, I think that's a really strong attribute because, I mean, all the best athletes in the world have coaches. And imagine Tiger Woods having a swing coach, and every time they asked, "How's my swing?" He's, "Oh, yeah, you're fine. Everything's fine." You can't if you can't share or challenge that status quo, you're then we really do we need you? I mean, it's unique. So if you're listening and you're considering a coach or a consultant, at least ask that question about that, because if somebody struggles with being able to call a spade, so to speak, it's really going to be hard for them, I think, personally, to have a successful relationship. And I'm just curious, Sonya, on your end, are you on board with that, or what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. You have to be able to have that trusting relationship to know, and I talk to my clients about this when we first start, right? I say it's not you and me face to face. It's you and
Yeah,
me side by side,
yeah,
looking at your vision and how you get there and how you grow as fast as your ambition. I'm in this with you. I'm a partner with you, but that means that we need to trust each other and to be transparent with each other and honest about what's working and what's not working, right?
yeah. And trust is I mean, to me, trust is the foundation of pretty much any relationship, of any business, because if we don't trust our leadership, we're not going to be engaged. We're not going to have an interest in showing up. We're not going to have an interest in going above and beyond. I mean, we're always looking out for our own interests because we're so concerned about that. So thank you for sharing that. Couple questions before we let you go. You have something called Red Thread Leadership, and I wanted you to share with the listeners today what that is, because I thought that was a pretty cool way to look at things.
Yeah, so we start with purpose, as I mentioned. That's the Red Thread Leadership has 5 Ps, and purpose is the anchor, right? So we
Okay.
start with the
Yep.
why, how, and the what. And then the next P is plan. So that's your vision, your strategy, your goals, your plan for what you're going to do with your purpose.
Yep.
And then the third P is process. And that's where we really look at how do we create the synergies in your organization so that people are collaborating, and that 1 + 1 = 3 that I talked about from Disney is really
Sure.
creating processes around that so that you're getting the most out of your organization, breaking down the silos. And it doesn't matter if you have a company of 3 or a company of 300,000, this can happen where people
Sure.
get sort of tunnel vision on their own area. So we look at what kind of processes can we create for collaboration. And then the fourth P is positions. So how is your organization structured? Do you have the right people in the right roles? How do decisions get made? How do you know who to hire, when you need to hire them, and what those people need to be like to fit into your culture to further your vision? And then the fifth P, as I mentioned, we call culture passion. And so the fifth P is passion. And that's about creating a culture that's passionate about the purpose of the company, and that each person doesn't just know their role and engaged in that purpose, but they're passionate about their role in it. They're excited about how they're contributing to that purpose. And then, of
Wow.
course, the final thing, like we talked about, which is the most important thing, is do they trust each other?
Sure. So it's purpose and plan and process and positions and passion.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking right now, because I'm feeling it through the microphone, that this is like overwhelming for some people because they've never thought of it before. Is this like a really long, if somebody was interested, and we'll get to it in a second, wanting to connect with you, and let's say you have a call and you start chatting with somebody, is this a really long, drawn out process? I loved before what you said about speeding up something by taking an assessment. So I totally can tell you're a high D, because any high D wants, if you can speed anything up, right? That's why people listen to podcasts at 1.5 speed, because they wanted to get more, in less time. But on these, is this really long? P for process, is this a long journey together?
It depends, right?
Okay.
So everything that we do is customized for our clients, right? So we really talk to them about what are your biggest challenges in speeding things up towards your vision right now, right? So sometimes it's as simple as the leader needs executive coaching, right? We just need to upskill the leadership to be stronger leaders. We have our purpose in place, we have our vision in place. We just need a better team to lead the
Yeah.
organization forward. Sometimes it's we know the team's not working well together, but we don't know what the problem is, right? So we need to do some assessment and diagnosis about what's
Sure.
happening, and
Yeah.
then come up with a plan that's really going to get the biggest bang for where they want to move forward. So it really depends where, we just like every organization has their own purpose and vision and that ambition that we talk about.
Yeah.
We start there. Like, what is it that you're trying to create? What are your current obstacles? And let's start there. And then see where we can evolve that's going to have the biggest impact for moving you forward. Some companies want to go through all 5 Ps. Some companies just want to go through one. Some just want to do an aspect. They just want to do the assessment to understand, and then they take it
Sure.
from there. And we
Yeah.
work with clients however they want to do it.
ID wants to do one, right? The C
Right.
wants to do like all five, like ad nauseum, right? So
Right.
you can tell where I am because I'm ID and I'm already trying to go, holy cow, how do I fit all this into my day? But I think that's
Yeah.
the challenge because, I've done a lot of work with trades over the years in construction, and it's funny because they have this, you start as an apprentice and you work your way up to a journeyman and you work your way up through practice, you work your way up through training and education. So if somebody then jumps into leadership, I'm so shocked, Sonia, why they don't think that they need leadership development or leadership training. Because most of us at the surface think leadership's just telling other people what to do, right? And so it's like, oh my gosh, that's super easy. I can tell people what to do all day long. Um, do you spend a lot of time in leadership development in with your clients? Is that a pretty called upon piece that you guys have?
Yes, absolutely. And I think taking it even a further nuance is I think a lot of companies, especially big companies, have leadership development programs that they run regularly. And then when you move from a manager position into a director position, that's a different
Yeah,
level of leadership. It's a different
sure.
way of seeing the world, right? How you're approaching leadership is different. Moving from a director to a vice president, different perspective, different level of leadership. Every one of those moves requires different skills and different capabilities when it comes to leadership. And I think a
Mm,
lot of companies don't realize that. They just kind of, oh,
yeah,
they're doing a good job, let's promote them.
yep,
And
yep.
but they don't support them in that promotion. So
Right.
absolutely, that's a big piece of what we do.
Wow. I tell you, sales people that get promoted to sales managers, so often it's an epic fail. There's such a different skill set for a sales manager as opposed to a sales professional. And so I can see that where, manager, line manager, whatever, as you move up the corporate ladder, so to speak, I can see where you need a different set of traits, you need a different skill set, and for some odd reason, we think that, well, I learned it once or I've been doing it a certain way. I feel like that's a pretty big blind spot in business today. So I really appreciate you sharing that. One last question, I'm gonna let you go. What's your tip of the day be, Sonia, for somebody listening? Maybe it's something we've already covered. Maybe it's something on your heart that just feel the need to share with the audience. So what tip of the day would you have today?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm passionate about right now, in particularly, is I'm seeing such an increase in burnout,
Okay.
whether it's in the entrepreneur world, whether it's in the corporate world. I think things are moving so fast. We have such rapid change, and on top of that, a tremendous amount of uncertainty of the future, right? So we used to do, 3-year strategic plans. we don't do those anymore. We can't see, we have no idea what things are going to be like in 3 years. Let's be honest, right? We have
Yep.
areas of focus now, but
Yep.
we're not going to be able to plan the next 3 years. And I think these two things, this speed of change and uncertainty, is a big contribution to burnout. And so the tip that
Sure.
I would give is just whatever you're doing, get really clear about what your purpose is for it. Even if you don't know the why,
Mm,
if you're having a conversation with somebody, what's the purpose of the conversation? If you're having a meeting, what's the purpose of the meeting? If you're sharing that a decision's being made or we're making a change, what's the purpose of that? And bringing some clarity around that so that
yeah.
people know on your team, that they know where you're going, and they know, and they're clear about, what the next steps are to get there. And you
Sure.
get everybody on the same page about that is, I think, going to help reduce some of this burnout and help people see that they're not just on a treadmill to nowhere, but we
Yeah.
are actually making progress in that direction. And because, when people are feeling burnout, that's going to impact their health, that's going to impact their family relationships.
Sure.
It's a big crisis as far as I can see. And I think that just taking those steps of getting clarity and purpose will make a big difference in reducing that burnout.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's funny what you said because I was listening to one of you were a guest on a different podcast, and you guys were laughing about, trying to do a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. And it's just like, yeah, I totally makes total sense, right? It's like, I mean, on one hand, yeah, we want to do it. And even like I think the Traction book was, it's been out for a while, but they're talking like a 10-year master plan. And I'm like, wow, that's over my pay grade because I'm like, how do you possibly in today's market with today's shifting workforce, everything, the customers evolving, so much change, it's hard to do. Now, again, please don't hear me. I'm not saying don't plan. I just don't know how, like you were saying, you can be out 3, 5, or 10 years. But again, for people on this call today, you know what? If burnout is an issue, I think it's again, maybe it's a blind spot. A lot of us have that blind spot. You feel that this is just normal to be living in stress, living under that type of pressure. And some stress is good, like deadlines for a project in a month is if you have 4 weeks worth of work, that's not a bad stressor on your life. But if that 4 weeks needs to get done in 4 days, that's obviously a huge deal. So if people want to connect with you, Sonia, about this, if something today that we talked about kind of, sparked something inside them, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
The best place to go is to our website at executiveleader.com. We have, not only can they reach out to me there, all of our social media is on there. There's a ton of free resources. There's webinars on the why. There's free trainings on Red Thread Leadership where you can see case studies of companies can do that. It's all free. And so that's the best place to go, is at executiveleader.com.
Executiveleader.com. What a cool place. Thank you so much for carving out some time for this today. I hope that, again, for the listener, as I say every week, rather than just jump into your next activity, why not sit with this for a minute? Think about one thing that Sonia mentioned today that really kind of resonated with you and commit to do something with that. It's so easy for us to go through and consume content and never really have that content make an impact. And so, whether it's the Red Thread Leadership, maybe it was her journey from Disney to entrepreneurship, actually entrepreneurship to Disney, back to entrepreneurship, which is again an awesome new one. But at the end of the day, hopefully your business is growing as fast as your ambition. And if it's not, please reach out to Sonia and have a conversation. Check her website. We all love free content. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And I can't wait to keep learning from you.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation. It was great.